Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to COS at Home. I am your host, Jonathan Viod, and thank you so much for joining us. We have a great show lined up for you this evening. We have an update on a previous action at home and a new one that's important and timely. We also had the most responses ever to a mailbag question, and I can't wait to talk about that with you tonight. For our main event, the interview segment of the program, we will be joined tonight by best-selling author, speaker, host of the Heidi St. John podcast, and newest endorser of Convention of States, Heidi St. John. She's the author of Becoming Mom Strong and many other great books. So we'll be really looking forward to talking with her. Now, as we get the show started, it's time for an introduction to Convention of States from one of our activists. Tonight, we hear from Sebastian in Iowa about why COS gives him hope. Check it out.
What's wrong with our federal government right now that definitely we as the American people can fix through Article 5 of the United States Constitution is that we do not have any stipulations in our Constitution with accounting principles on how we should spend money, how we can avoid heavy indebtedness, which is unbiblical. And also, we don't have term limits for unelected officials, unelected bureaucrats. People should support Convention of States if they want to get involved in their local government and understand the processes of government and feel like they're really making a difference and to really experience the fact that they actually do have a voice. And I see a young generation like myself involved with Convention of States and support Convention of States. I think it's hopeful because there's going to be a next generation that's going to come after us, and they're going to learn from our generation. And it just may not be that the Moses generation takes us there, but perhaps it'll be the Joshua generation. And that's what keeps me hopeful. The fact that I see a young generation there, it's going to happen. I just don't know how quick it's going to happen, but I think that we are moving in the right direction. And that's what gives me hope. That's what I tend to focus on. That gives me a lot of hope. So go to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition.
That was awesome. Thank you, Sebastian. Love the scripture reference there as well. And very well said, sir. There are just two things I want to add to what Sebastian said. One, if you are unaware, the COS resolution calls for a convention to address three specific items: imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, reducing the size and scope of the federal government, and placing term limits on members of Congress and federal officials. Second, it's important to remember that we are more than a convention. Our mission statement is to build the largest engaged army of self-governing grassroots activists in American history, or the way I put it, to reestablish a culture of self-governance. The founders built a system of governance that was dependent on an active and educated citizenry, but unfortunately, we Americans have allowed the comfort and distractions of everyday life to prevent us from doing our duty. Convention of States is focused on changing that, and we hope you will join us. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the program, we have an update for you on an important action at home that we did. You may recall last year, we recommended that you help us by signing a letter calling on President Donald Trump to support the Convention of States movement. Well, I am excited to announce that we hit a major milestone before the end of the year. And as of now, we have over 110,000 signatures on that letter. It's amazing. And I want to thank all of you who did go ahead and sign that letter. If you haven't, we want you to go ahead and do that. The more signatures we can get, the more we can make clear to President Trump that we, the people, believe this is the way to saving our country, doing an Article 5 convention. Help us by adding your name or sharing it with a friend. You can do that by visiting conventionofstates.com/Trump to sign today. That's conventionofstates.com/Trump. All right, folks. So typically this is the point in the program where we would pivot to our 5 for 5 segment. However, with the start of the new year, I wanted to share what's been on my heart and mind heading into 2026. First, let me ask you a question. Have you set a New Year's resolution? Well, maybe you answered our mailbag question about America's resolution. Although I'm not usually a fan of resolutions, tonight, as we start 2026, I wanted to humbly suggest one for each of you. In fact, this is a goal I've set for myself going into this year that I'm sharing with you tonight. But first, let me provide a little context. My daughter attends a classical school here in our area, and part of their curriculum is for the students to tether their education to virtue, particularly the 4 classical virtues: temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude. The latter, fortitude or courage, is to me the greatest of virtues. Without courage, we cannot properly apply the other virtues. As a cursory review of history proves this to be true and demonstrates the danger caused by an absence of courage. For example, those of us who are believers know that the courage to obey God's commands was missing in the Garden of Eden, and all of mankind suffered as a result. Or how about 2,000 years ago when a carpenter from a small town called Nazareth was condemned to a brutal execution under false charges? What if those who knew of his innocence had the courage to speak truth to power? Perhaps the result of the absence of courage is best captured in the 1946 poem First They Came by German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller. In Pastor Niemöller's poem, the narrator describes that when the Nazis came for different groups, the narrator lacked the courage to speak out. Finally, when the Nazis came for the narrator, there was no one left to speak for him. Of course, we have a modern example of COVID to remind us of how dangerous society can become when so many of us lack courage to say no to things like lockdowns, masks, and experimental vaccines. Compliance replaced courage, and so many people have suffered, and so many more will suffer from our failure. However, history also shows us the blessings that come from courage, even in the darkest of hours. 250 years ago, 56 men courageously signed their names to a document that many saw as their death warrant. Today, we celebrate the men who signed the Declaration of Independence and the ideals it contained upon which our nation was founded. On September 22nd, 1776, a 20-year-old man courageously stood at the gallows from where he would be hanged and declared that his only regret was that he had but one life to give for his country. Although he was killed, Nathan Hale's martyrdom for liberty continues to inspire the country founded thanks to sacrifices made by men like him. The scourge of Nazism that we discussed before was eradicated from Germany because courageous young men boarded boats, crossed seas, and bravely charged a beach under a hailstorm of bullets on June 6, 1944. Unless you think courage is only to be found in time of war, what about the courage of a 31-year-old man to sit in a tent on a crowded college campus and offer microphones to people who adamantly opposed all that he stood for, despite the many death threats he and his family faced? Even on September 10th, 2025, when a friend warned him of the tall buildings on the campus of Utah Valley University, Charlie Kirk never wavered from the courage of his conviction that we must continue to have conversations, especially when we disagree. Charlie's courage inspires us all, and though his life on earth was cut short, his martyrdom will save countless eternal lives. Reverend Billy Graham once said, "Courage is contagious. When one man takes a stand, the spines of others are stiffened." This year, I encourage you to be the one that takes a stand. If you are a believer, courageously share the gospel as far and wide as possible. Or would you have the courage to attend and speak out at a school board meeting? Will you have the courage to pick up the phone and call a stranger to thank them for signing a Convention of States petition? It can be intimidating to host a meeting of strangers to talk about a solution big enough to solve the problems, but will you have the fortitude to do so this year? Would you have the courage to join with other like-minded patriots to show up at your state capitol and speak with legislators about COS and Article 5? There are so many ways, big and small, for us to demonstrate our courage. May the Lord grant us the strength to courageously use our gifts to advance the cause of liberty in 2026 and beyond. And now we have the great pleasure of welcoming to the program best-selling author of Becoming Mom Strong, speaker, host of the Heidi St. John podcast, and the newest endorser of Convention of States, Heidi St. John. Heidi, Happy New Year. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm really doing great. It's a great day to be part of the Pacific Northwest, even though I'm surrounded by communists and Marxists and socialists. I still have a lot of hope for the country.
And we are so grateful for it. And it takes a lot of courage to be surrounded by them and continuing to be a happy warrior. So thank you so much for doing that. We're really excited to have you joining us tonight. I typically ask first-time guests to tell us their COS story and how they first learned about Article 5. However, I think some in our audience may not be too familiar with your work. Would you tell our supporters a little about yourself and then how you learned about Article 5?
Sure. Yeah. So my husband and I have 7 children and 8 grandchildren. And I have been very engaged in the homeschool community for a long time. I sit on the board of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. My husband and I are the founders and executive directors of Firmly Planted's Homeschool Resource Center. It's the first and largest homeschool resource center of its kind in the nation. We have about 1,200 kids here right now, and very, very involved in the freedom movement here in the United States, first through homeschooling. In 2022, I ran for Congress here in Washington State's 3rd Congressional District. And I'm coming up on this year, I'll be I think in May, I'll be finishing up my 14th book, which is going to come out from Harvest House early next year. So doing a lot of writing and a lot of homeschooling and a lot of William Wallacing around the country. I found out about Convention of States because I am very good friends with someone you all know very well, Mike Ferris. I sit on the board with him at HSLDA. So I think it's funny to hear myself be the latest endorser of COS, because I endorsed COS a long time ago. I'm just now doing it officially. So really excited to kind of put the weight of my platform behind COS and believe that the founding fathers understood a truth that history repeatedly confirms. And that's this: when power is left unchecked, it's always going to expand. We absolutely saw it. I saw you just talk, Jonathan, about COVID. And in their wisdom, the founding fathers did not entrust the preservation of liberty to good intentions. And instead, they built safeguards directly into the Constitution. I first heard about it from Mike Ferris when he started explaining Article 5 to me. I actually had him come on my podcast and talk about it. This idea of a convention of states was basically just one of those safeguards that is going to allow us to empower the states to act when the federal government exceeds its bounds. And we're seeing that happen. Of course, we have seen it for a long, long time. I love the wisdom of this, not an accident, not an afterthought. It really was a gift of foresight from men who knew that freedom must be guarded by structure and humility and accountability. And so I'm a super fan of COS and can't wait to see what God's going to do through this movement in 2026.
Well, we are so grateful to have your support officially, even though we've had it before, and we're grateful that you are putting all of your support behind us. We thank you so much, because you are a force, as you mentioned, all of the things that you have been involved in, and the great work that you are doing for homeschooling and for liberty and our culture out there in the Pacific Northwest. Speaking of that, each new year, many people get excited about the prospect of a clean slate starting fresh.
Mm-hmm.
For many others, they're looking forward to putting challenging times in the rearview mirror. You have been very public about how 2025 was challenging for you personally, and yet you remain on the battlefield, relentlessly fighting for God and country. What gives you the courage to persevere? And is there advice you can share to those who are experiencing hard times themselves?
That's a great question. And you're right. 2025 was a very difficult year for me. It started with difficult news in January, and basically it was tough all the way through. We lost one of our staffers to cancer this year. One of my very good friends, also another homeschool mom, passed away just before Thanksgiving. And then one of our staffers just before Christmas. I had a major surgery this year. We've had a lot of political setbacks in 2025 in the Pacific Northwest. But listen, you guys, I've read to the end of the book. And I know that one of these days, God's going to make it right. And we have a job to do, a role to play. God calls us to use our voices in whatever capacity that we can to stand for freedom. And the homeschool movement, for example, as Mike Ferris is always saying, is a freedom movement. America was built on the principle of self-governance. So free people governing themselves under God, with clearly defined limits on civil authority. And over time, and I've been talking about this on my podcast for a very long time, we've drifted away from that foundation. But I believe, and I know that you guys do too, that it can be restored. Too many Americans have surrendered responsibility in exchange for this false sense of freedom and even for comfort. And we see this in, in the crazy radical people that are protesting night after night after night in the Pacific Northwest here, near Portland, Oregon, where I live. And so to me, this country is worth fighting for. It's why I ran for Congress. I believe in the principles of free of governance and of a free society. And as we've seen the Marxists kind of gain influence here in the Pacific Northwest, these systems that centralize power, look what's happening in New York City right now under the ridiculous leadership of Mondani. This guy's openly talking about taking property rights away from white people. It's amazing where this country is. And the Convention of States really offers this constitutional, lawful path to reclaim what we've lost. That to me is exciting. I tend to be an optimist. I'm always looking for, what are the solutions? How can we train our children up so that they can take their place on the battlefield? Ultimately, and I know you believe this too, the battle that we're facing in our nation right now is largely a spiritual battle. And spiritual battles require spiritual weapons. And yet, for generations, we have sent people to the highest positions of authority in our land who cannot wield spiritual weapons. And so I believe with everything that's in me that God's people need to engage again. And one of the ways that we can do that is through the Convention of States, because it's going to empower the states and ultimately the people to reassert accountability and renew the principles that have made us the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And we can do it without chaos, without revolution. COS is not about tearing down the system. It's about repairing it according to the wisdom of the founders so that liberty can once again rest in the hands of a responsible, engaged citizenry. And Heidi St. John is absolutely here for it. I think we have so many reasons to be hopeful. And I believe, and I've experienced this absolutely with a very frightening health scare in my own life this last year. Our days, according to God's word, are numbered. And we're not going to live a single day beyond what the Lord of Heaven's armies has already ordained. And when we believe that that's true, it doesn't matter if it's COVID or a car accident or cancer, we're not going home a moment before the Lord has already determined that it's so. And it takes the fear out of living. And I want my life, and I know that you do too, I want my life to count for eternity. And I want it to count for freedom and to defend this country that I love so much. And I want it for my grandchildren. And so I think we have a lot to be excited about as long as we don't give up. Mike told me a long time ago when I was running for Congress that the surest way to lose a fight was just not to show up to fight. And so I say we show up, and we show up to engage, and we show up to be educated. And I think God's going to do amazing things in the years to come. So I'm actually optimistic about what lies ahead in 2026.
That is so extremely well said. And I love what you said there too about Convention of States, that we're not trying to tear things down, we're trying to repair things. And I think a lot of our opposition does not understand that. They peddle a lot of fear because this process has never been used before, and they try to intimidate people to keep them away from utilizing this because they think that it's going to run away and we're not going to be able to have the fortitude and the courage to make sure that we do everything we can to keep it on the tracks. And I don't think that, first of all, we the people have to get this action done, right? We're the ones who are going to our state legislators. We're having them pass this resolution in order for us to call a convention. We're not then going away. We're going to stay engaged. We're going to stay on the battlefield like you encourage so many people to do, to get off the bench and stay in the battlefield. And so there really isn't anything to fear in that regard, because we the people are doing what we're supposed to be doing and being active and engaged and holding our legislators' feet to the fire. So I personally, having reviewed this process as much as I have, I don't think there's anything to fear except fear itself. Now, as you mentioned, or as I was mentioning to you, you talk to people, and you when you're talking to your supporters, you're encouraging them to get into the battlefield. And I think that aligns perfectly with our mission, what we're trying to do with Convention of States, because we're trying to build that engaged army of grassroots activists, or reestablish a culture of self-governance. What are some specific actions people may take if they have never been involved in political or cultural battles before?
Well, I think that the first thing you have to do is get educated. And, COS is really good about that, teaching people about the wisdom of the founders and how they gave the states this tool to specifically address federal overreach in Washington when Washington refuses to correct itself, right? Which happens over and over again. So the very first thing we need to do is we want to be the most educated people in the room when it comes to the issues that we're facing as a nation, when it comes to cultural issues, to spiritual issues. We've got the time for lazy patriots, and I think even lazy Christians, is just over. And so that to me is the very first thing. And the next thing is to come before the Lord and say, Lord, what would you have me do? When we pray as Christians, historically, for the last, I would say 50 years, this is probably true. We're praying, we're asking for things. We want a better job, or we want our health to be healed, or whatever. I think that God honors obedience. And so I've been encouraging people now for a long, long time to say, when we come before the Lord, we should be saying, Father, what am I here to do? What do you want me to do? What are the gifts and abilities that you have given me that I can use in the protection first of the gospel, and then of freedom? And honestly, we need to recognize if we lose our freedom, we're going to have an awful hard time sharing the gospel. It should matter to us. And so to me, it's get educated, and then it's ask the Lord, what would you have me do? And then it's show up. It's your life, you guys. Show up for it. You got one opportunity, you get one chance. It's why my husband and I homeschooled our 7 children. It's why I spend so much of my time traveling around the country at speaking at conferences all over the place. It's why I teach the Bible. God's given me a limited number of years and a limited skill set. And I want to use the skill set in the number of years that I have to accomplish as much as I can, rather, for the glory of the Lord and for the furtherance of what I believe is the greatest nation on the face of the earth. So I think we have an opportunity right now. Certainly, if you're not homeschooling your children and your children are of school age, I urge you, I cannot say it strongly enough, get your children out of public school, because we are turning out in our public schools and our public universities every single year by the hundreds of thousands, kids who hate this country, who don't understand the blessings of liberty, who believe that the nation is nothing but a bunch of colonizers, who don't believe in the sanctity of human life. In many cases, don't even understand what a woman is. We're so confused, and that confusion is coming out of our education system. So I've been urging parents to pull their children out of public schools, to either homeschool them or put them in a good private Christian school. But we've also got to take responsibility again for the education of our children, and who Thomas Jefferson called the rising generation. That is our responsibility. And I think it's time for us to take it seriously.
That is so well said, and I agree 100%. Our daughter goes to a classical Christian school here in our area, and honestly, it's one of the best decisions we've ever made. And she's only in kindergarten, and we can see the impact that will have, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that she continues in that way. And I would encourage it for anyone to either go, as you said, to a classical school or to be homeschooled, because the public schools are just they're a nightmare, and they aren't serving the interests of our children.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I would say they're injuring our children. Body, soul, mind, and spirit. Our children are being injured by the messages that they are getting out of the public schools, and we're seeing the fruit of that. And it honestly will not matter. And this is another reason why Convention of States is so important. It will not matter. Even if we win, let's say we win the midterms, which for goodness sake, we better, everybody better buckle up for that. But let's say we win the midterms, and then we've got another good run in 2028. We're going to run out of time on the clock, because it is simply a math game at this point. It is a numbers game, and we are literally turning out kids who hate the country and don't understand the founding fathers. They don't understand the wisdom that they instilled into our Constitution. I mean, to me, it is a 5-alarm fire. And I have been telling parents for a very long time, get your children out of public school and take responsibility for their education. It absolutely matters. And, Jesus said in Luke 6:40, when he was addressing the Pharisees, that when a student is fully trained, he'll be like his teacher. Jesus understood that when young children are being formed, because these are formational issues. These are not opinions. These opinions have been formed. They're formational issues. You talk to anybody who's down right now protesting on the streets of Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington. If you ask them what their worldview is, they cannot even defend the position that they have logically. This is coming from our education system. It's a 5-alarm fire. Parents need to get their kids out of public school. We got to do it yesterday.
Yeah, and in fact, I noticed something that you posted on Facebook recently about one of the biggest news stories that has been taking place over the last couple of days, and you had noted that the reaction that you had seen to President Trump's decision to have the U.S. military capture Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, that the reaction from some was actually an indictment on our education system. Could you elaborate on what you were referring to?
Yeah, I mean, what you see happening is a failure on the part of our education system to educate young people and even older. It's not even just young people. I mean, you go down. I mean, I hate to keep throwing the Northwest under the bus, but if you go to Seattle, Washington right now, or Tacoma, or Portland, Oregon, or Eugene, Oregon, you're going to find a bunch of silver-haired boomers out there with signs calling for the release of one of the most tyrannical, brutal dictators ever to exist in the world. And the reason they're doing that is because they have been indoctrinated by our government education system to believe that socialism is better than what did Mondani call the other day, rugged individualism. This is coming out of our schools. And I was urging parents to take their children out before their kids turn into these silver-haired idiots who don't understand politically what time it is, can't balance a checkbook, don't understand the blessings of liberty, would give it up in a heartbeat to a communist dictator if given the opportunity. And this is coming from our education system. And unless we stop the bleeding, unless we put a tourniquet on the bleeding, like what we're trying to do here through the Homeschool Resource Center, we will eventually lose our country to this ideology.
So, those who are involved with political activism or step onto the battlefield encounter many different voices and opinions. I'm also sorry to say that there are many influencers that prey on people's skepticism of government and institutions and promulgate misinformation. As you mentioned before, the political battles really have become more intertwined with spiritual warfare than perhaps ever before, certainly in my lifetime. What methods do you use to filter out the noise and discern truth?
Man, boy, these are good questions. Listen, we are surrounded right now by lies, absolutely surrounded. We're surrounded by conspiracy theories. I think in the era of COVID, a lot of us realized, man, hey, we're being lied to. We were being lied to by our government, and it opened the door to all kinds of things. We need to remember, this is really important. I teach on this all the time at my podcast. God is not the author of confusion. God is not the author of confusion. When you see influencers, I don't even care if they used to be dependable, or we used to respect them. I can think of 2 names right off the top of my head of people that I have followed for many, many years and have had tremendous respect for, who have just gone off the rails as it relates to issues that are happening in our nation right now. And so we need discernment. Spurgeon said that discernment was not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. So a really good example of this would be the Marxist movement, otherwise known as Black Lives Matter. If you did just a little bit of research and didn't let your emotions guide you and your emotions drive your decisions, you would see that Black Lives Matter was a Marxist movement that didn't care at all about Black lives. Black Lives Matter doesn't care about the Black unborn. It doesn't care about Black police officers, does not care about Black conservatives. It was never about Black lives. It was always about a political ideology that's rooted in Marxism. And we saw cultural Marxism really take root in the culture because a lot of people allowed their emotions to drive their decisions and change their avatars on social media to Black squares because they didn't want to be seen as unloving toward the Black community. When if you really were to just look at it or take a step back, pray over it, ask the Lord to show you, you would have seen the signs from the very beginning that were there for everyone to see. It's just that we allowed our emotions to cloud our judgment. This is happening with social media influencers. We're seeing people be informed by social media influencers who have an agenda that is often antithetical to freedom in the United States. And like I said a minute ago, it doesn't matter If 5 years ago they were a trusted voice, if you notice that they're going off the rails, if they're saying things that they probably shouldn't be saying, or they're touting ideas or ideologies that are antithetical to what we know to be true, then we stop listening to those people and we start listening first to the Holy Spirit and then to people who are following the Holy Spirit in their professional lives and also in their private lives. Just a little bit of homework and a little bit of digging around. This is why I said earlier that one of the very first things we have to do is be educated. We've got to stop taking our news from influencers on social media and really ask the Lord for discernment. And as AI continues to become more and more ubiquitous, we're going to need to be discerning. And I think it's going to be maybe the number one thing that Christians are going to have to fight for in their own lives and in their own spirits in the months and years to come.
Yeah, I think my wife was telling me that you had an interesting conversation with ChatGPT recently that gave you more of a realization of just how dangerous AI has become.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I was actually responding because I'm getting ready to go over on tour with my friend Ken Ham and some of the team members in Answers in Genesis to do the Gospel Reset Tour in Australia. And so I was really concerned and saddened by the shooting at Bondi Beach, which obviously, fell in Hanukkah. It was obviously an Islamist attack. So I said to ChatGPT as I was getting ready to do my show notes, I gave it, I think, 5 talking points. And I said, hey, can you help me stretch these 5 talking points into 2 minutes each about how Islam, there's no such thing as a good Muslim, because a good Muslim is a murderer. A good Muslim has to kill the infidel. A good Muslim is going to make you pay a tax or make you convert to Islam. There's no such thing as a good Muslim. And I was trying to make that point, and I made the point to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT corrected me and said, I will not do that. I will not. It said, I'm trying to protect your ministry and your reputation. I'm not going to let you sully an entire religion. And I was like, oh, no, we're not doing that. You're going to do exactly what I asked you to do. You're the computer. I'm the human being. But it reminded me that ChatGPT is not unbiased. It has programmers, and we need to remember that. ChatGPT is not the final authority. It's not the be all end all. What we've got to remember is that we need to do research for ourselves. This is why I brought up Black Lives Matter. We need to do research for ourselves. This is why I'm telling people, watch what Tucker Carlson is saying. Watch what some of these people are saying. Some of these guys are saying things that are absolutely anti-American. And if you believe for 1 second that AI and some of the voices that are rising in the culture right now are getting their information from reputable sources, you don't understand the nature of the battle that we are in. ChatGPT is a wonderful tool. It's not necessarily always a truthful tool.
Yes, and it's a creation, and it's not better than the creator. And I
Yes.
think we've seen that in a number of instances. And I am stealing that line from State Senator Brian Birdwell, who was actually talking about convention of states on the floor of the Texas Senate, and he was making that point that the federal government is a creation of state governments, and the creation is not greater than the creator. And we have him, meaning the state legislature, had the authority to go and adjust what is going on with the federal government because it thinks it's the other way around, just like ChatGPT thinks that it knows better than you do as to what you should be saying to protect your ministry and everything like that. Again, the creation is thinking that it's greater than the creator. And we as human beings often think that we are greater than our creator. And that's something that really needs to change if we're going to turn this country around and do everything we can to fight against all of our enemies.
So good. Yeah, it's really true. And we've got an opportunity right now. And the question is, are we going to rise to meet the moment? That's really the question.
So you mentioned in 2022, you ran for Congress. I believe that was in the state of Washington. What led you to that decision, and what did you learn from that experience?
Oh, man. Well, I ran for Congress. It's probably important to say, I ran for Congress having never run for office in my life, never ran for school board, never ran for anything. And I jumped into a federal race that I had no idea. The New York, the New York Times is going to call it one of the most vicious races in the nation. And I almost won that race. And I think what I learned in it was that it was wrong for me to assume that the Republicans were always the good guys and the Democrats were always the bad guys. There are bad actors in both political parties. And I learned that, and I'm still actually very concerned about this. I'm so glad I ran for Congress. It gave me the experience of a lifetime. I got to spend an hour with President Trump by myself at his Bedminster country club, and that was extraordinary. I got to sit with him and talk about Joe Biden and all kinds of it was an amazing, amazing opportunity for me. I'm glad the Lord allowed me to do it. I would say I came away with that deeply concerned about the divisions within the conservative movement. And we are seeing them now raise their ugly head in the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You can see that the fault lines in the Republican Party and the conservative movement run very deep. And unless we don't need uniformity, but if we're going to win, we do need unity. And we have got to stop this scorched earth campaign that we run in primaries against fellow conservatives. Ronald Reagan, who I was a huge fan of and used to campaign for when I was a kid, said that this was the 11th commandment, thou shalt never speak ill of a fellow Republican, especially not during an election. And the Democrats will walk in lockstep with each other. But because I think Republicans are typically more independent minded and we tend to think for ourselves, we're airing all of our dirty laundry out in the public. We run these scorched earth campaigns, and then you get to the general election and you wonder why nothing will grow. Well, it's because you scorched the earth. There has to be a more of a congeniality in the conservative movement. We can disagree about things, certainly, but we better agree about what we really want. And at the end of the day, in the election, we've got to come together. If we don't do that, we will lose the country. And I think the handwriting's on the wall there. And so that was my big concern. That was my big takeaway. I was not ready for the infighting in the Republican Party when I ran for Congress. I mean, I was ready to face Nancy Pelosi on the floor of the House of Representatives. You put Heidi St. John on the floor of the House of Representatives, that woman was not going to know what hit her. I was not ready for the bold and vicious attacks that I endured at the hands of people who should have been my friends. That was very, very hard. And it was an important lesson. And I think I've learned it.
Well, I know I, for one, would pay top dollar to see you and Nancy Pelosi debating on the House floor. I think that would be amazing.
It would have been good. Would have been good.
So last question I have for you, Heidi. My theme for the show tonight was really to focus on courage and how we need to ask the Lord to grant us the courage that we need to use our skills in the fight for freedom. Now, there's been a discussion, maybe you can even call it a debate, among some conservatives about how best to advance the cause for liberty in our country. Some believe that the best course of action is for patriots living in states with, we'll say, anti-liberty governments, which I'm sorry to say really has just been blue states, to flee states that have governments with much more pro-liberty agenda. My family and I somewhat took that course of action. We left New Jersey, moved to the free state of Florida. However, I have a deep respect for those who choose to stay in states like New Jersey or Oregon to advance the cause for liberty there, despite the uphill battle. So as an activist in Oregon that's obviously hostile to liberty, what advice or encouragement do you have for others that are behind enemy lines, if you will, and trying to keep moving forward and advance the cause for convention of states and liberty?
Well, I mean, I think the very first thing is, as a general rule, we're never called to run from anything. We shouldn't be running. And I refuse to leave my home. My husband and I was born in Portland, Oregon. My husband was born in Seattle, Washington. We currently live in Southwest Washington. This is our home, and we will not be driven from it. And I believe, it's actually not true that there is any safe state in the United States. I mean, if you look at what happened in Florida just a few short years ago, Ron DeSantis won his bid for re-election by a sliver against a radical. And it wouldn't take much for these states to turn if the people that move from states like New Jersey to Florida, or from Oregon to Florida, or to Tennessee, or wherever, if you don't get engaged in the political process in the states that you move to, those states will be lost eventually also. And so to me, I would rather dig my heels in and try to teach people about our Constitution and set an example of what it means to leave it all on the field. I'm going to leave it on the field. one of these days, I've learned a very valuable lesson in 2025, and that is that our days are numbered. And it was very sobering for me, to be honest with you. And I realize at 55 years old, my life is more than half over already. And I want it to count for something. And I don't want to spend my life running. And I think a lot of times we spend our lives running. I'm not saying if God calls you to move, then absolutely move. I mean, more than anything else, we got to listen to the Lord. But I don't want to run because I'm afraid. And I don't want to run because I'm frustrated. In places like Missouri, I was just interviewing a pastor from the great state of Missouri the other day. Missouri last year lost their bid to protect the unborn, and they passed a constitutional amendment. Well, miraculously, it was just thrown out on a technicality.
Wow.
And they have the opportunity right now to do what they should have done before and fight like there's no tomorrow to protect the unborn in the state of Missouri. And I think they're going to do it. And here in Washington State, we are not going to give up. I'm holding a meeting here at the Homeschool Resource Center tonight of some area influencers politically, a couple of sitting representatives, like a state senator. We're going to be talking about what it is that we want to do. And I hope we want to win. If we want to win, we need to learn to work together. If we want to win, that means we're going to have to make concessions, sometimes in areas that we don't want to make concessions, because we see the greater picture and the greater good of working together. And I think that we can do it. And so if you're living in a blue state, if you're in California, or if you're in Oregon or Washington or Colorado, for goodness sake, we're about to lose Idaho. People should pay attention to what's happening in Idaho. Some of these places that we consider to be red states or safe states, they're not safe at all unless the people that are currently living there decide to get up off of their couches, get off the bench, get onto the battlefield and engage, run for school board, run for city council. We belong in all of these spheres of influence, and they matter. People will say to me, well, the way that I'll tell you how we lost Oregon. Oregon didn't always used to be this way. Neither did Washington. We lost it, frankly, because because Christians decided that Christians shouldn't engage in politics. We decided that Christianity and politics don't mix, except for politics determines policy and policy shapes the nation. Why, in the name of everything that is holy, would God's people not want to be involved in politics if politics shapes nations? Why did we exit that conversation? Why did we leave? Why did we run? We ran because we allowed the enemy to lie to us about what was at stake. And now we know. And so I hope, what I'm doing now, someone asked me when I was running for Congress, why was I doing it? I said, first, I was doing it out of obedience to the Lord. Secondly, I was doing it because I love this country. And thirdly, I was doing it because I want to leave an imprint for freedom that's so big my grandkids can see it from space. I've got a young grandson now who's about to turn 13. So our oldest grandchild's almost 13. Our youngest is 6 months old. I imagine we'll have many more grandchildren in the years to come. What we're doing now, we do for them. And for the rising generation, it's a responsibility. It is a duty of God's people to engage in the process. And in so doing, we say thank you to the Lord for the blessings that we have experienced of living in the freest nation on the face of the earth. It will not stay free unless we defend it. So whether you're in a red state or a blue state, the responsibility is the same. Get off the bench, get onto the battlefield. I don't care where you are. Maybe stop running and start engaging.
I don't know that I could say anything more other than amen. That was extremely well said. Thank you so much, Heidi. And as someone who is a cancer survivor myself, I certainly understand and appreciate how precious life is. And so I want to extend my deepest condolences to you on the loss of your friend. And just again, thank you so much for everything that you do. Folks, you should be listening to the Heidi St. John podcast. I really recommend it. And we are so incredibly thankful and blessed to have the support of you. And God bless you and everything that you continue to do for the cause of liberty. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And that is Heidi St. John, again, the author of Becoming Mom Strong, as well as coming up 13 other books, right? She's got another one coming out, and we are really blessed to have the support of Heidi St. John. Wonderful to have her on the program. And I have to give a thank you to my lovely wife, Sarah, and some of our family friends for inspiration on some of those questions tonight. They're fans of her show, and I appreciate their recommendations. Speaking of Idaho, we don't want to lose Idaho, and we want to pass the COS resolution in Idaho. And coming up next Thursday, January 15th, we have a big event going on in Idaho. We are going to have Mike Ferris, who Heidi was talking about, and co-founder of Convention of States. He's going to be out there with our senior vice president of grassroots and legislative affairs, Rita Peters. They're going to be out there at the Capitol in Boise on January 15th. You can sign up and be there and join us. We want to rally these legislators and encourage them to pass the COS resolution. For more information on that, you can go to conventionofstates.com / and I'm forgetting the link. Oh, why did I go there? I'll see if I can grab it before the end of the show and we'll share it with you folks. I apologize. But if you're in Idaho, join us in the Capitol next week, January 15th. It'll be at 1:00 p.m. Central Time. All right, now it's time for Action at Home. All right, for our Action at Home tonight, legislative sessions are beginning in many states across the country. We're just talking about Idaho, which means this is one of the busiest times of the year for Convention of States activists. Our teams across the country are preparing for Capitol visits and surge events, and you can aid our efforts right now by writing to your legislator and asking that they support Convention of States. So if you live in a past state or a pending state, it is vitally important that legislators hear from their constituents how important this movement is to our nation's future. You heard Heidi talking about just how important it is. So the way that you can help is you can go to conventionofstates.com /act. That's our Take Action page. There in the upper right corner, there's a button. It says to call or email your legislators. You click on that button. It's going to bring you down to the bottom of the page where you can then find your state. You'll see your state flag. You click on your state. That will direct you to another page where you can enter your information. You can enter your name, your first name, your last name, your address, your email, and your phone number. And then you'll click submit. And what will happen there where it says act now, it'll switch to another page. It'll identify who your legislators are. And there will be a template email for you that you would be able to edit and add your own comments. But we wanted to get you started there with information about why you support Convention of States. And of course, we would love for you to add your personal stories to that as well. That is a simple thing that you can do right now from the comfort of your own home and let your legislator know that you stand with Convention of States and you want them to do so as well. So again, conventionofstates.com /act and ask your state legislator to vote yes on COS. Okay, let's go ahead and check the Minutemen Mailbag. All right, for the Minutemen Mailbag, the first one of the new year, we asked you a question. If America could make one New Year's resolution for 2026, what should it be? And my goodness, did y'all answer that one? We had over 50 submissions for this mailbag. Thank y'all so much for participating and sharing your thoughts. Now, of course, we can't go through all 50 submissions, so producer G and I worked to whittle it down to our top 6. So here we go. Andy Deach, I believe is how it's pronounced, said to resurrect the teaching of American history and civics to our kids in public schools and everywhere else, with a special focus on the history and true nature of socialism and communism. We also had one from Linda Vines, and her resolution was very similar to Andy's, as were many others. Linda said, America's New Year's resolution should be to rekindle the American spirit by promoting educational activities that highlight the principles of our Constitution, resolve to teach and remind all citizens who we are as Americans. Well, that gets to right what Heidi St. John was talking about, how important it is that we need to educate ourselves. That's step one to becoming an activist, is make sure you are educated. And I would add to this, when it comes to our education system, I think we really need to start to tether them to things. In particular, I think we need to tether it to virtue, those 4 classical virtues that I talked about earlier: temperance, prudence, justice, fortitude. Those are the things that our students need to be learning about and need to be adding to, or tethering their education to. Make virtuous citizens, prepare our young people for being the next generation. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said I'm going to butcher the quote. I believe it's the philosophy of the classroom in one generation becomes the philosophy of the government in the next. We need to be engaged, and we need to make sure that we're making our schools serve our children, making virtuous citizens that will then go on to become the leaders and sustain liberty for posterity. And so I love Andy and Linda and so many others' resolutions on this. We can do that. We can do that. Of course, it'd be a great resolution for America, but that's something that we as activists should do and we can do. So get involved with your school boards and education systems in your area. Brett Kolbus said, finish the border wall, deploy the military if necessary to combat cartels, and enforce strict immigration laws to ensure national sovereignty. I totally agree with you, Brett. We really need to get our immigration system under control. I've heard it said, and frankly, I think I agree with it. We need a moratorium on our immigration right now. We need to just turn off the spigot, stop having people come into the country, get things under control, and then we can figure out exactly how we want people to come in, people that will contribute to our society, not just letting everyone in because this is America and they want to get in. No, we want people that are going to come here and that are going to contribute to our nation and believe in the ideals upon which this nation was founded. They are outlined in the Declaration of Independence, which we're celebrating this year, 250 years. Well, if we want to get to 500 years, another 250 years, we need to make sure that we do everything we can to get our border under control. So totally agree with you, Brett. Leroy Richard wrote in and said that the government follows the Constitution as it is written and not as they see it. And, that is so well said, Leroy. So many people try to say that, Convention of States, you can't trust the Constitution or how do I want to say this? It's not that you can't trust the Constitution. It's that, or no, that's what people say is that the people aren't our governing officials are not listening to or following the Constitution. And that's not correct, right? They are following the Constitution as it's been interpreted through our years of judicial supremacy, if you will, in this country. We need to get back to the original intent of the Constitution, take a look at the Federalist Papers, study them and appreciate them, and really enforce that. And I totally agree with that resolution. So I love it, Leroy. Thank you. Mary Maynard wrote in and she said, we resolve in 2026 to become one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. How can you add anything to that? It's perfectly said, Mary. We need to get back to that. We need to return our country to a country of self-governance. We need to have a better understanding of the ideals in that Declaration of Independence and what we recite in our Pledge of Allegiance. We need to come together and use those things that bind us together as a nation, that bound us together when we first got started and sustained us all this time. We need to get back to that. I think too many of us and too many in our society feel like America is the problem in the world instead of it being the solution. And that just simply is not true. And we need to fight and combat that type of thinking. Last one we have here is from Tracy Grabiak, and I love all of these submissions. She said to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence by learning its real history and how it helped lead to the U.S. Constitution, and by using Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to work toward restoring some of the original intent of the Constitution via passing in the Article 5 COS resolution in as many states as possible this year. Amen, Tracy. Amen. Let's get behind the Article 5 Convention of States movement. We can do this. We can get some of these states passed, but we need to come together and make sure that we're doing that. These are all wonderful resolutions for what our nation and what America should be focused on. The truth of the matter is, though, it comes down to us. right? The Constitution, the first 3 words of the Constitution are "we the people." So we're the ones who have the power to really push for these resolutions to be adopted, for our countrymen to embrace them. But we have to be engaged in the fight. We have to have courage to show up at those school board meetings and push for reformation of the school curriculum in our area. We have to have the courage to sign up and become a volunteer with Convention of States. We have to be willing to make those phone calls, make a trip to our capital. Sometimes you may live in a state. I know in Texas, there are places where it takes 10 hours one way to get to the Capitol. You need to do it. You need to be there. Thankfully, Texas doesn't have a legislative session this year, so you can think about it for another year. Me here in Florida, I live 5 hours from Tallahassee. I got to get in the car. I got to go up there. I know so many other people in Florida that have to make that drive. Others in states like New Jersey, pretty much anywhere you need to go in New Jersey, it's maybe 2.5 hours. You can make it to your capital. You can be there. You should be there. You should be talking to your legislators. You should be advocating. You need to have the courage to do this. This is the only way that we're going to restore our country to its former glory. It's the way that we're going to preserve liberty for posterity. So you need to be in the game. I want to thank all of you for submitting those amazing resolutions and answering our mailbag question. And if you would like to have your answer read on our program, be sure to go to conventionofstates.com/mailbag for the Minutemen Mailbag for our future episodes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the conclusion of our show. Just a reminder, all of the COS at Home shows are aired live on the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. The next show will be on Wednesday, February 4th at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And my guest will be the aforementioned Convention of States co-founder and senior advisor, Michael Farris. Of course, the legendary Michael Farris has a long list of accomplishments. I will go through all of those on our next show, but I cannot wait to have Mike join us again. And as you are aware, COS scored a major victory in the courts late last year in Kansas, setting the stage for Kansas to potentially become past state number 20 this year. Could it be this month? Could it be tomorrow? It's not going to be tomorrow. Could it be very close? It could be. So we're very excited to be talking with Mike about how that happened and so much more. Be sure to join us Wednesday, February 4th for our next COS at Home program. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to once again thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I hope you found it helpful and edifying. Thanks again to Heidi St. John for joining us tonight and for her official endorsement of Convention of States. Big thanks, as always, to the legend Producer G for all of the hard work he does behind the scenes and keeping me in line. And the greatest thanks goes to all of you for all of your continued support of Convention of States and Article 5. It's important to remember that despite all the problems we currently face in our country, I'm with Heidi. I have a lot of optimism for 2026 and beyond, because I know that you and we the people, are the solution to the problems. And Article 5 gives us the solution big enough to solve these problems. We just need to have the courage to be engaged and to get it done. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your continued support. May God bless you. And before we close out tonight, we have a special year in review video of the 2025 COS highlights. Take it away, Producer G.
You do have some allies inside the Beltway now.
Couldn't have planned this, but we have Vice President J.D. Vance as a supporter, the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, Caroline Levitt is a supporter, Mike Huckabee is a supporter. So we have administration support all across sort of the highest levels of the administration.
Former presidential candidate Rick Santorum knows New Hampshire likes to be out in front in national politics. He's encouraging that spirit to get behind an Article 5 Convention of States, a never-before-used constitutional authority he says would allow state legislatures to check the power of the federal government by proposing constitutional amendments.
I'm willing to try to do something and use a tool that's part of the Constitution.
High taxes, big government. This is not what the Founding Fathers had in mind. But they'd seen this movie before, and that's why they gave us a solution as big as the problem. It's called an Article 5 convention. Let's audit DC into oblivion and unleash America.
No amount of litigation from Texas or standing under the 10th Amendment is ever going to force Congress to balance their budget. The Founding Fathers explicitly put into the Constitution a mechanism by which the states can rein in the federal government.
We need to have a convention of the states, ideally, if it gets bad enough, to pass a balanced budget amendment and term limits especially.
It's an Article 5 convention of states. You want to go around Washington, D.C., get the amendments you want. You want term limits, you can put that into the Constitution.
Can you tell our viewers a little bit about Convention of States and what its mission is?
The mission of our organization, Convention of States, is to get 34 states to pass those resolutions so that we can actually gather in a convention and propose amendments.
If 34 states agree to call a convention, it would be the first time in history.
You know, we have around 19 states right now.
I've always been a big supporter of the Convention of the States. Get the states together and
focus on the Article 5 Convention of States.
Yeah.
And let's actually do things like a constitutional amendment around term limits for members of Congress, because I fully support.
Things are never going to change. That's why I'm a big fan of the Convention of States provided for in the Constitution.
Is it now the best time to move on this to help restore those chains that the Constitution is supposed to place on government?
I think that's even more of an argument for the people to essentially take their belt off and say to the government, this is going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me.
A better option for Elon Musk put his money and his effort behind the Convention of the States.
There are a bunch of things that could be done on a structural level that would actually help and could be done by a convention of states. That'd be the best use of the money.
And to my dying breath, I'm going to continue to support this movement because I know what you know. This is the make or break movement.
I've gotten probably more emails to support the Convention of States since I've been a state senator than just about any other issue. I'm talking about thousands of people that said, I've signed up and I want to save our country.
My purpose in getting engaged in politics really was to cut the size and the scope of the federal government, to cut it down to size and to shove it back into the constitutional box. How's that sound?
The mentorship has been absolutely exceptional.
You're going to grow, you're going to be challenged.
You are leaders when our country desperately needs leaders.
Hundreds of people here from all over the 50 states.
We get our grassroots from across the nation here.
Obviously, we can feel the energy in this room.
We're going to be louder, we're going to be bolder, we're going to be more courageous. We will not be silent. We will speak, and we will speak the truth with passion and courage.
I want to watch us restore self-governance in the country.
I've never known where I was supposed to be before. And for the last 6 years, I've done what I believe God intended me to do. God was on my side and we could not fail.